Welcome back, you pugnacious pummelers. I'm Lupinefiasco, this is Daily FaB Gameplay, and today we are playing Jarl Vetreidi. For anyone who is new to the channel, what we do here is review replays of games I played on the Talishar.net client days or weeks ago. After enough time has passed, that I lose my bias and can more objectively judge the quality of my games. I will talk through turn cycles as if I were taking them now, explaining my thought processes for the lines I would take and comparing them to the lines I did take. We either learn from my mistakes or reinforce good play patterns with the overall goal of tightening and optimizing our gameplay in the future to take down paper events and walk away with that shiny cardboard. If you would like to check out the deck I'm playing here or try it for yourself on Talishar, there is a FaB deck link in the video description below. While you're down there, if you haven't already done so, please consider a YouTube subscription. It's the best free way to support me and to make sure that you see daily FaB gameplay in your video feed 5 days a week. I have a Blue Sky, I have a Discord, and I have a Patreon where you can find the matchup guide for this deck list. Now, without further ado, let's jump right into the action. We lost the die roll at the start and were chosen to go first. I think that's fine. We get to put a counter on our tunic, and Azalea has another turn without an arsenal. Maybe she can use the quiver to get an arrow in on turn 0. Ideally, we would have drawn a hand that would incentivize her to block, maybe with something like Blue Glacial Footsteps, or an attack that we could send that prompts her to block and then not have the resources to use quiver. We can also hope that she gets unlucky. As far as how to play this hand, we have a couple of options. The easiest one being that we play Imposing Visage and get Crumble to Eternity. We can put a -1 counter on Fandal Spring Tunic. The issue with that line is that we aren't playing Exposed to the Elements and we aren't playing Mangle, so we don't really have a way to destroy a piece of armor once it has a -1 counter on it, so Crumble doesn't really do anything. I do think that playing Expose and pitching 5 or 6 into it to get Channeling Frigid is the correct line. We definitely want to filter cards out of our hand, and I do want an arsenal, so a line of Imposing Visage, get Crumble to Eternity, put a -1 counter on New Horizon just that it doesn't block as well, and then use an additional card, this Polar Blast, to pitch into Coronet Peak and force ourselves to discard Autumn's Touch. Doesn't really sound good. Instead, let's just get Channeling Frigid and then Arsenal Polar Blast. We keep Channeling Frigid around. Azalea, even with the Sandscour build, doesn't run too many blues, so she will probably have to devote quite a few cards to even putting 5 or 8 damage together, and we can just block that out. Meanwhile, we put the Polar Blast in Arsenal, we can pitch a blue, play the Polar Blast, draw a new card, create your own energy potion. The reason I'm showing you this game is not that it's particularly close. Full disclosure, I do win this game by quite a lot, but what this game has is a number of decision points where I think I chose very poorly and can optimize those play patterns. We learn a lot less from games that we win than from games that we lose, but at the same time, it's important to evaluate the games that you win to see how you can win more, because you won't always be ahead when you have to make these decisions. And when you have to make the correct decision when you're behind, that's when the practice really pays off. So Azalea is just filtering cards out of her hand, fails to find an arrow she wants to load with Sandscour Greatbow. We can evaluate how to play this hand. It's a pretty bad hand, all things considered, just based on the fact that we don't have a good attack. We have Autumn's Touch, but that's only 5. We don't have a way to buff it. What this hand does do is keep Channeling Frigid around, so we can play our Winter's Bite, get a card out of Azalea's hand. Either she'll pitch a blue or discard a red. Then I think we pitch our Crumble to Eternity to play Polar Blast from Arsenal. Well, we should start with the Polar Blast. Play Polar Blast from Arsenal, draw a card, see maybe Azalea pitches, probably not, but we draw a card, we get an ice card into our banish zone, Depending on what we draw, maybe we find an attack and we have a blue in hand, we have Crumble to Eternity. If we draw Oaken Old, we can play Infuse It. If we draw Summer's Fall, we could play that. If we draw CNC, we could play that. All of our attacks are online. Maybe we draw something that we'd rather put into our arsenal, so we feel good about playing Red Winter's Bite. Maybe we don't, and we would play Red Winter's Bite, but we have 2 resources floating the whole time, and worst case, we pitch Red Winter's Bite and attack with Autumn's Touch. We send 5, probably would dominate. We have 2 ice cards in our pitch for Channel Lake Frigid, and then we get to Arsenal Polar Blast. This turn isn't good, but we have a lot of lines available to us, and I think they all start with playing Polar Blast from Arsenal just to get ice into our pitch zone and see what we draw into. I think starting with Red Winter's Bite is worse. I think it's fine. I mean, really the most important thing this turn is to get 2 ice cards into our banish zone, into our pitch, this Polar Blast and this Crumble. I think that the Coronet Peak line is fine, considering that we have Channel Lake Frigid out. It's very unlikely that Azalea is going to be able to convert these 3 cards to anything manageable and reasonable, and we keep blue 3 block in hand. But overall, I just think that we kind of bungled that last turn. We definitely could have done it better. So taking a look here, Azalea still does nothing but sets up a 6-card hand. We do not have a way to keep Channel Lake Frigid around. Even if we draw an ice card off of Polar Blast in Arsenal, what we really need here is an attack, preferably something that works with Pummel. So I think pitching Autumn's Touch into Polar Blast is good. I don't know why I'm pitching the Sink Below here, because we have Tunic. There really is no benefit to pitching a red instead of a blue unless we want to get the red out of our hand, and I guess I'm thinking that I want to put Pummel into my arsenal rather than Sink Below. But I do think that having the Sink Below in arsenal is good, right? We're playing against an Azalea, she's going to throw dominated on hits. And if nothing else, the Sink Below lets us fix an all-red hand and maybe find that blue. The cards we draw into are pretty bad. They'll work for what we need to have happen. We're going to play this Red Winter's Bite, get a card out of Azalea's hand, and then we will overpitch to Coronet Peak, pitching Pummel and Autumn's Touch, and we'll arsenal this second Pummel. We have our Tunic up, so as soon as we draw something, any attack, we are set up to pitch a blue and then Pummel with Tunic for CNC or Frostfang. If we draw an Oaken Old, we can fuse Pummel it depending on the cards. These 4 reds that we draw into are why we would want a Sink Below in our arsenal instead of a Pummel. That said, we do have a Sink Below, so we can definitely look for a blue off the top of our deck. We've got an Infecting Shot coming in for 6 with Dominate. This block here should be Gauntlets and Sink Below, and then Sink Felling of the Crown to try to find a blue. If we find a red, then we just pitch that and Oaken Old to attack with Frostfang. If we find a blue, then we get to pitch that to Frostfang and then Tunic Pummel, arsenal our Oaken Old. Blocking with the Stalagmite here makes sense if I think my Azalea is going to Flight Path and shoot off this Murkmire Grapnel, but there are a few problems with it. The first being that Azalea's Tunic is online. So Azalea, if she was going to Flight Path Murkmire, can just respond to the Stalagmite trigger with Fiendal Spring Tunic, make a second resource, use that to pay for the Flight Path activation, and then honestly not even need it to pay for Murkmire Grapnel, because she just needs the 1 resource. Murkmire costs 0. So the Stalagmite block here is very bad. It definitely should have been Gauntlets of Boreal Tundra. That also helps by putting a Battle Worn counter on it and making it so that we are 1 block away from breaking it and putting it into our discard so that we can decompose. In any case, we do stop the Infecting Shot trigger on hit effect, which is good, but I just think that the way we went about it was not great. We do want to play around Flight Path or Bolt and Shot, meaning that we want Stalagmite available to give Azalea that last minute Frostbite. Azalea here just keeping cards in deck by pitching into Quiver to put cards into pitch instead of to discard. It's a good practice for Azalea to be doing. It isn't particularly relevant here. We aren't expecting this game to go to fatigue. The big thing for Azalea is that she is getting cards out of her hand, and that's what we want to have happen. We've got a grapnel coming in for 5. There is no on-hit, so we don't need to worry about putting a bunch of armor or cards from hand in front of this. We have an Oakenhold in arsenal, a blue, and ice and earth card in hand. So we're going to block with the Summer's Fall, take 3, we'll pitch Frozen to Death to play Oakenhold, we'll fuse it with Summer's Fall and Frozen to Death, and then Arsenal, Summer's Fall. So we have a very spicy turn lined up, and blocking with Summer's Fall to put another earth card into our discard is just gravy, icing on the cake. The Oakenhold, get our fuse. Pitching into Quiver doesn't really help Azalea here. She will just block 3, lose 2 of these cards, and probably worst case for us is she pitches a blue, finds an arrow. She does find Judge, Jury, Executioner off of a blind Azalea, which is very nice for her. Fortunately for us, we draw into a Pulse of Isenloft, so we can block this out. We will pitch Channel Mount Ison, play Pulse of Isenloft, put another earth card into our discard, and then pitch Frozen to Death to play Summer's Fall and get to Decompose. The Decompose effect does nothing. There are no auras on the board for us to target, but it does put 2 earth cards into our Banish, so that our next Felling of the Crown will be online. And of course we don't have to discard our hand to Judge, Jury, Executioner. We will need to block with 1 more earth card in order to get it into our discard. Summer's Fall makes 1, we need a second for Felling of the Crown. This is where blocking with Gauntlets would have been nice, because the Gauntlets could have gone into our graveyard after 1 more block, but worst case scenario, we have Rootbound Trunks. We also draw into a Fruits of the Forest and a Sow Tomorrow. The Sow Tomorrow doesn't really matter as far as playing it, but blocking will let us get another earth card into our discard. We can also just discard Fruits. So here we've got a Heat Seeker coming in for 8 with a Ponder token attached to it. We definitely can't let this hit. We do have a Sink Below in Arsenal, so what I want to do with this hand is block with Gauntlets, Gauntlets, Fruits, and Sink Below. Cover the 8 on our turn, play Frostfang by pitching Glacial Footsteps, and then Arsenal Sow Tomorrow. Our Tunic will be online by the time we draw into our next hand, so using Tunic to pay for Sow Tomorrow might get us a blue to fix an all-red hand, or if nothing else, we draw a card. We replace Sow Tomorrow, make your own energy potion. We even have an Oakenhold in our graveyard that we can put back into our deck. Here I'm just really convinced that I need to block with Stalagmite, and I don't see why. In certain matchups that I do play Stalagmite, blocking it as early as possible does make sense. Florian is a hero I keep running into, where blocking with the Stalagmite early makes sense, because Florian isn't sending Swarming Gloomveil, Runerager Swarm, or anything else with Go Again all that often, so turning on Summit as soon as possible makes sense. And I'm running Exposed to the Elements, so it is likely that I will break a piece of opposing armor before my opponent starts blocking with it. But against Azalea here, it just doesn't make sense. So I would rather have no Gauntlet, but a full Stalagmite, than where I am now, where I have a full Gauntlet, but no Stalagmite. Azalea here, doing some nonsense, throwing Murkmire Grapnel for 8. With an aim counter, we can just block with Staunch Response, pitching Imposing Visage, take 1 point of damage, and then play Frostfang, pitching Autumn's Touch. We keep our Sow Tomorrow, and just set up for the next hand, still throw some disruption with Frostfang. not a very impressive turn, but we at least get a card out of Azalea, one way or the other, and then see what happens after that. I just don't get this line that I'm doing here. I know that I want to put another Earth card into my banish, and I'm trying to arsenal the Staunch Response if I can, but that means that I'm going to pitch Imposing Visage to play So Tomorrow, draw a card, still have my Frostfang that uses the 2 floating resources, and then I guess I'm relying on a specific few number of cards in my deck that I could play, like Winter's Bite, Icequake. If I found a Pummel, I could play that. I just don't really like this line. I would have rather prevented more damage from that Murkmire Grapnel, still have Disruption, and still have So Tomorrow that would be able to draw me a card on a turn where that actually matters. You know, we find an Oaken Old with a handful of reds, or we find an Oaken Old but we're missing one of the elements, and maybe So Tomorrow helps fix that. So I think this was a big misplay on my part. We're definitely ahead. We have a Staunch Response in Arsenal, so we're feeling okay about our position, but overall, it's just a very sloppy way to play that turn. Heatseeker coming in for 5. Again, we do want to block this. We have another Staunch Response in hand, and only 1 blue that we would like to use to either pay for Command and Conquer or Coronet Peak. So what I want to do here is use Spring Tunic and Staunch Response in hand to play Staunch Response from Arsenal, and then use Winter's Bite to force a card out of Azalea, and then pitch Polar Blast into Coronet Peak to force another card out of Azalea. Put her on a 2-card hand, and then Arsenal Command and Conquer for when she has maybe just passed the turn and put a card into Arsenal, or pitched into Sandscour Great Bow and then Arsenal her other card to try and set up a 6-card hand. But I definitely don't want to let the Heatseeker hit, and I definitely do want to play a Staunch Response. So here I'm pitching multiple cards for the Staunch Response. I'm about to undo so that I can use my Tunic instead. There is no reason to not use Tunic here. All I would be doing is, I would rather have an Arsenal than have a Tunic, especially because we're not planning to use Tunic on our next turn, so we are just giving it time to come back online. Again, blocking the Heatseeker with Staunch Response. Azalea does not have an Arsenal for us to threaten, so Command and Conquer doesn't actually get cards from Azalea. This does not force her to do anything. So I would rather save the CNC for when Azalea does have an Arsenal, or when I can draw into Icequake or Pummel, or maybe even more Winter's Bites just to make it harder for Azalea to block the CNC. This hand that we've drawn into is not bad. We get to play Felling of the Crown. We are going to take quite a bit of a loss as far as value because Azalea didn't give us the opportunity to filter any cards out. I love this line. I'm going to bottom the Command and Conquer in my hand to the Felling of the Crown, which means that I still have my Crumble to Eternity. So if I draw an Oaken Old and another blue off the top of my deck, I get to just play Oaken Old and fuse it with Crumble. Azalea is going to give us a Fate Foreseen out of Arsenal, so only taking 4 from this Felling and keeping 3 cards. We draw into a very impressive looking hand that I'm going to misplay. I am 1 resource off of being able to Channel Lake Frigid CNC Pummel. I only have 5 resources. I have Crumble, Staunch, and Tunic, which means that what I should do here is play Staunch Response by pitching either Crumble or Channel Lake. It doesn't really matter. Pitch one of my blues to play Staunch Response and block out this immobilizing shot, then pitch the other blue and use Tunic to CNC Pummel. What I'm going to do instead, because I am miscounting my resources and think that I have enough to pay for this, is take the damage. If I did have the resources to pay for this, if this Staunch Response was a blue instead of a red, then I would really love to use it here, just not block anything and Channel Lake CNC Pummel. But I am 1 resource off I'm about to pause and realize that I can't pay for my turn the way that I wanted to. We are still going to Command and Conquer here, and then Arsenal Pummel. We'll keep our Tunic online. We have Channeling Frigid. So Azalea definitely loses 1 card. Here choosing to lose 2, and pitching 2 blues makes me think that she has a pretty awkward hand if she is blocking with blues in the face of a Channeling Frigid. We draw into an Oakenold, a blue to pay for it, and the cards we'll use to fuse it. So we are just going to Oakenold Pummel. It's going to be Oakenold, we'll pitch Channel Mount Ison. We're going to pitch we'll pitch Winter's Bite to pay for Pummel, and then Arsenal to Sow Tomorrow because we have our Tunic. And we can use that Tunic to play Sow Tomorrow, put an Oakenold back in our deck and draw a card. But more importantly, by pitching the Winter's Bite, we're keeping Channeling Frigid on the board. Azalea here smartly pitching into Quiver just to get cards out of hand so that she doesn't have to discard or bottom. But what is not great about that line for her is that she loses the Quiver. The Quiver hit, but Azalea didn't have arsenal spots available to use it. We have some lines available to us. Again, took that intellect penalty, or we are going to take an intellect penalty because Azalea didn't force us to block anything. So what we can do with this hand is play our Felling, pitch a Glacial Footsteps, bottom our Summer's Fall, send 8 at Azalea, get a card out of her hand because of the Felling, and then just have Tunic blue, Sow Tomorrow. What I can also do with this hand is pitch Footsteps to play Sow Tomorrow from Arsenal, draw a new card, and just hope to find something relevant. Icequake, Pummel, Oakenold. If I'm making this call now, I think I am just sending Felling and keeping Channeling Frigid in hand and Sow Tomorrow in Arsenal. We cannot keep our Channeling Frigid on board around no matter how we pitch. So the question is, what do we want to IP ourselves with? Playing the Sow Tomorrow here means that we get to Arsenal probably something better than Summer's Fall. We can also just draw Oakenold off the top of our deck because we're the greatest Flesh and Blood players. The way that I want to now use this Oakenold is I want to overpitch. I want to pitch Summer's Fall and Glacial Footsteps to play Oakenold, then fuse with Channeling Frigid and Felling. Said 9 dominate, bottom 2 cards, and Arsenal Felling, intending to play it on my next turn. The Oakenold was incredibly lucky off the top of the deck. I don't know that I would make this call now. The benefit of playing the Sow Tomorrow is that we free up our arsenal so that we could maybe Arsenal Summer's Fall, maybe think about not overpitching, and set Arsenal an attack that maybe has some value. We are going to still get 5 points of damage across onto Azalea. She'll bottom these 2 cards at random. It just means that she doesn't have a turn. We do lose her Channeling Frigid, so she could Tunic Remorseless if she wanted to, and maybe if this other card in her arsenal is a pump, then she gets to send 8. And how do we want to block this? Knowing that we have a Felling in Arsenal, we can just use Channel Lake, Channel Mount, CNC, cover 9, and just, pitch Fruits, play Felling. We could also block with Gauntlets, and that lets us discard Fruits to gain 2 life. I believe I might not have enough Earth cards in my graveyard without the Fruits to play the Felling or to decompose. And that is the case, actually. A smarter player than I would have checked that. So yes, blocking with the Gauntlets and discarding the Fruits was, a correct line. If we had blocked with the Fruits, it goes to our graveyard that way. The question is, do we want 2 more life or 2 more armor? And I am pretty sure we want the armor against Azalea. I think blocking with the Gauntlets was wrong, but this does just extend our lead. What we get to do with this hand is kind of not a lot. Azalea does not have Tunic online, so we can play Winter's Bite, get a card out of Azalea, pitch, crumble, and frozen to death to attack with Summit for 6, and then discard fruits to gain 2. Definitely is not our strongest line. Summit does not have an on-hit because Azalea still has all of our armor and it doesn't present lethal, but it is a way to turn this hand into 6 damage instead of 5, and none of these cards are really anything I want in my arsenal anyway. It isn't like I wanted either of the blues that I just pitched and maybe should have attacked with fruits instead. Azalea is just going to pack it in, I don't blame her, but we are going to at least look at the top cards of each player's deck and maybe see what was coming up for them. So we have Azalea with a Lace with Bloodrot in hand. I would end my turn by discarding fruits, going up to 29, passing without an arsenal. Azalea arsenals Lace with Bloodrot, and then passes the turn. Her tunic ticks up to 2. So Azalea's next turn is going to have 2 Lace with Bloodrots available, Stone Rain, Read the Glide Path, and Heat Seeker. Azalea would also have a tunic online to be able to use to pay for Sandscour Greatbow to get an arrow into arsenal. Our next turn would be Winter's Bite, Autumn's Touch, Crumble, Polar Blast. That means what I am doing to pressure Azalea off of this 5-card hand is I would play Winter's Bite, get a card out of Azalea's hand, pitch Autumn's Touch and Crumble to attack with Summit for 6, and arsenal Polar Blast. Our next turn would have Pummel, Autumn's Touch, Sink Below, and Felling of the Crown. We would need to... actually, we would be fine on Decompose because we're going to discard this fruits to gain 2 life. So we pressure Azalea down to a 4-card hand with Winter's Bite, and then potentially prompt her to block with Summit, though that seems unlikely. What she could do instead is just Lace, Tunic, load Stone Rain, send Stone Rain for 10 with 2 Bloodrots on hit. But then our turn after that, I would pitch Autumn's Touch to play Polar Blast, draw a card, draw this Imposing Visage, and then get to use our Tunic to send Felling of the Crown for 8, bottom, Sink Below, and then have Imposing Visage and Pummel. So, very good turn setup for us. So like I said, not a particularly close game. I think Azalea is supposed to be a very easy matchup for Jarl because of how disruptive he is and how few blues she plays. As soon as we get a channel like Frigid down, it's very hard for Azalea to do anything meaningful, and especially if we ever get any of her armor and we start giving her Frostbites with our Winter's Bites. A red Winter's Bite, even a blue one if she doesn't have Tunic, just takes half of her hand. She has to discard a card to the Winter's Bite and then has to pay with a card through the Frostbite. It's absurd. So Azalea is an aggro deck that Jarl is very good against, and even when Jarl misses on the disruption, Azalea doesn't necessarily have the damage to really go off. She isn't a Zen where if you leave her alone for a turn she does 25, or an Aurora where you leave her alone and she combos you for 30. Azalea just doesn't quite have that potential. And even if she hits you with the Red in the Ledger or the Remorseless, you do have 1 action hands that are just insane. CNC Pummel plays through Red in the Ledger. Oaken Old Fused plays through Red in the Ledger. And Remorseless. So I did just want to go through this because I think I misplayed it quite a bit and had some very good turn cycles that made up for those mistakes, but even so, it's important to recognize those mistakes when they happen. So I hope you enjoyed this game. I hope you learned something along with me. If so, be sure to pummel that like button. My comments are always open for any questions or feedback. If you haven't already done so, please consider a YouTube subscription. It helps me out a lot. I have a Blue Sky, a Discord, and a Patreon. Those links are all in the video description below. Until the next time I see you on Daily FaB Gameplay, stay frosty.